Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Pencils and Lipstick. This is episode 245 of the show, and today I am talking with my guest, Sara Gentry, all about Kidlit. Kidlit is a different beast when it comes to book writing. So if you are in the picture book area, the middle grade area, or the YA area, you're going to want to stick around for this interview. In case you don't know me, I'm Kat Caldwell. I'm the hostess of Pencils and Lipstick. I am a novelist, a short story writer, and I am also a certified coach in fiction and almost in nonfiction. I'm just waiting for my feedback, but I'm confident that it will come. So Sara is all around just knowledgeable in this area, both in traditional publishing and in self-publishing. So I thought it would be great to have her on and talk about Kidlit. I do want to preface that this interview is a little bit on the longer side. It's almost an hour, just the interview alone. And so this part is going to be really quick. But I want to give you sort of this warning. The Kidlit area is changing, and hopefully it will change towards the better in the near future. It is a very difficult area to get into. And so we're being very real with you in this interview. And my goal is to always give you all the facts as far as I know, and to have people on the show who can tell us the reality of the situation. We all know that it is not free to publish a book, right? It's free to write a book, but it's not free to publish. And Kidlit can be even more of an investment of your time and of your resources. And Sara is going to get all into that. So I don't want you to be discouraged through this interview, but I do want you to understand the realities of what it is to put your time and resources into a book. And one thing that Sara shared with me that she said she had sort of wished she had shared in the interview was that it is recommended to have 3 to 6 books ready to go, even if you are only querying one. She said it's ideal to have half a dozen. So that's 6 books, even though you're only querying one book. So that is a little bit different than in the adult novel world. Of course, we always tell people that it's good to have 1 or 2 books, sort of ready to go or almost ready to go. But 6 books is a lot, right? 3, 4, 5, 6, that's a lot of books to have ready, even though you're only trying to sell one of them, right? So I want to add that to this conversation. You're about to learn a lot about Kidlit. And so you might want to get your pens and papers. You might want to check out the links below to follow Sara. And she gives the scbwi.org link as well, which is the kids organization, Kidlit organization that you will probably want to become part of. It is the big international one. So don't be discouraged. I'm going to preface that, but just do be realistic about this process and know that there is help out there and that a lot of people publish every year. And so there's no reason it couldn't be you. Without further ado, share this. Always, all the things, subscribe, share, all the things, check out the links below, and let's get into the interview. Okay. Hi, Sara. How are you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
I am good. I think we're going to have a great discussion, and we're going to start out with Kidlit because you are the number one person I know who works in Kidlit.
I kind of feel like maybe you need to meet more people.
I need to expand my circles.
Expand and retire. But thank you. I feel honored.
So first, before we get into anything, let's discuss what Kidlit is. Because, kids are different at every age and there's always a discussion going on. So how do you define, or maybe the industry defined, Kidlit?
Yeah. I would define Kidlit as anything that is intended for a reader that is 18 years old or younger.
No way. That is not what I expected you to say.
But I think a lot of people have a stigma that Kidlit would be ages 0 to 12. But
Okay.
technically speaking, YA is going to be included in the Kidlit categories.
Interesting. Okay, so that goes into agents and publishers as well. They
Yes. Yes. But what makes it interesting is, as I'm sure you know, some people that represent adult books will also represent YA, but then they won't represent middle grade and picture books, so there is
Right,
some crossover. And then people who do Kidlit will represent all the way up through YA, but then they won't do adult.
right, which makes it extra complicated for writers. That's just
Yes.
fun. Yeah,
Yes.
why not? Let's do
Yes.
it. So there's a lot of stories coming out of Kidlit. You've told me a couple, and I recently met someone who had this great idea. She had twins, and she had a good idea for a kid book and put it together and was told over and over again. I mean, she lives in like the ultimate place, like right outside of New York City, has contacts with publishers and agents, and is going, so like you'd think that she would have an easier time maybe, and she got a lot of, oh, this is great, but
Yes.
no. And I think that you talk about this, you have said this before, like she is not the illustrator, so she couldn't illustrate it, so they'd have to illustrate it. And then they were constantly saying this is great, but if you change the story slightly to become basically nothing like her story. And so it's in her drawer. Is that a pretty common story for Kidlet?
I think so, and for a lot of reasons, which I'm
Oh,
happy to dive into if
yeah,
you
let's
want.
dive into
Okay,
them.
so I think that one of the biggest problems facing Kidlit writers is that a lot of the general population kind of has, I don't want to say demeaning, but I think sometimes there's this stigma around children's books that they aren't as difficult to write as adult books.
Oh,
So sometimes people will think, oh, I have this cute little story about the puppy next door, and I'm going to write this story about it and I'll sell it. And how hard can it be?
hmm.
And because of that, you have just a ton of stories
Of how
inundating
hard
the
it is.
market. So, I mean, so you've got so many people who think
Yeah.
they've got a book for kids and they are flooding, the inboxes of
Okay.
agents and editors and everybody who has anything to do with children's publishing, which is why a lot of doors are now closed for people who are
Okay.
trying to get into children's publishing simply because they just can't handle the
The
influx.
overflow.
And I
Yeah.
totally get it, but it's frustrating for the people who are actually working on their craft and trying to improve and
Yeah.
break into the kidlit market. So that can be very frustrating. So that's one aspect of it. Another aspect is that kids' books just simply don't make the same money that adult books do. There are a couple exceptions, of course. We all know of some very popular children's books that have
Right.
become, you know, intellectual property with
Yes.
movies and television shows and things
Where
like that.
everyone's
But
making money off of that person's intellectual property. Yeah.
yes, exactly. But I
Yeah.
think those are few and far
Mm.
between. And so the advances, the royalties, everything is less in Kidlit,
Okay.
like
Okay.
substantially less, which makes it difficult for agents then to make their living off of representing Kidlit
Right.
authors,
Right.
because that means they're taking on twice as many clients as the people who are representing
But
adults.
within Kidlit, is there one that's more economical to the agent to represent then? Like, would YA be more than children's literature versus middle grade? Like, is there one that they tend to, like one that's even less or
Yes.
represented or harder to get into?
Yes, picture books by far
Okay.
are the most challenging for people to break into,
Mm,
um, and for agents to represent because so right now the trend is moving towards representing author illustrators, like people who are both
can
the
do it all.
author and the illustrator. And the reason is because now they don't have to split the fees with a
Mm.
second creator. So if I'm an agent who's representing a writer who writes the text only, not only is that advance split between the author and the illustrator, usually, I'm sure there are some exceptions where, a really famous illustrator or a really famous writer get a
Right,
heavier
right, right.
heavier weight of that. But for the most part, if I'm having to already take something that's not very much and then split it in half and then
Right.
take a 15% cut off of that, I don't blame agents at all because it's like a numbers game. It's
Yeah.
simply, they
They
might
got to
have to
eat.
put in all this work and they get like a $300 commission or something. I mean,
Right.
it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So that's another big part of it, is that it's just not economical
Yeah.
for those groups to represent. And picture books are expensive to produce. We're talking
They
full
are.
color, high
Yeah.
quality paper, hardback, like the whole nine yards. So all of
Weird,
that
like
makes it
weird
challenging.
size,
Yep.
like, yeah.
Yep.
Is there something about, because I never always looked at I'm trying to think back when my kids were little. There were always like the picture books where it was it was like a well-known character, so I would assume those are kind of printed by whoever owns that. Maybe we lived in France, so it's like certain characters, but I would say it's the same as Disney. Like Disney owns that property and they're the ones putting that out, right? So
Yep.
that's like one. So if there's a new princess movie coming out, good luck trying to sell a picture book of, your little princess that you wrote. Um, and then do publishing companies also though produce in-house like picture books? Like
Yes.
is it cheaper for them to do that?
Yeah. So sometimes they will do a work for hire,
Okay.
where they have their own people, whether they are working with freelance people that they have a connection with, or maybe even people within their own house who are writing books specifically for all that IP. So, Disney is certainly not going to let you write a book about one of their characters, but they might produce a book
Right.
about one of their characters. And so yeah, that work is not something that you can usually go into. You are usually approached or hired to do that kind
Ah,
of work.
really? Which makes it even harder because it's like, how could you even be approached if you haven't been published? They don't know
Right.
that you're there. But you're not only competing with other writers, then you're competing with Disney, Nickelodeon. I'm trying to think of all the other kid things.
That is one thing that I would say, for picture books up through middle grade, that is just very challenging in general. The more our culture is surrounded with other forms of media,
Mm,
we are competing with the other media just by being a book as opposed to a TV
yeah.
show. But then also you're competing even within the book world with like pieces of the TV world sold in
Yes.
book form. And it's really challenging for parents, I think, to know what kind of books they should buy for their kids. So a lot of times they will default to, oh, little Johnny likes this TV show, therefore I'm going to
Hmm.
buy him a set of books. Now, whether or not that's the best written story for little Johnny is
Yes.
another debate. So it's really tricky. And then plus, what tends to happen, I think, with kidlit sales is people will default to classics that they knew
Hmm.
when they were a child. And there's nothing wrong with classics. I love classics. I'm not here to to
Yeah.
bash classics, but it would suggest that the last 40 years of children's publishing didn't matter if
Doesn't
all we're ever
exist.
buying is books that came out,
That's
generations
true.
ago.
That's true, though. You do become a bit nostalgic as a parent, right? And you want them to sort of have that experience that you had. And then we have the issue where now you almost have the buyer's overwhelm, where you're
Yes.
overwhelmed with Amazon or even in Barnes and Noble. And I don't know about you, but like when I used to go into a library as a kid, the kid librarian knew all the books.
Yes.
And I have met some librarians here, but not all of them really know all the books. And it's probably because there are just that many more books there. Like, how are they supposed to know all of these different books, right? And same with bookstores. It's like trying to find a book. Oh, if my kid like this, many times I've been recommended books that she was like, this has nothing to do with what I like. I don't know. Like, they can't know everything, right? But
Right.
it does seem like the more they overwhelm, the less we're all able to sort of have that expertise, maybe.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree with that. And what's really sad is, school librarians and school teachers used to have a lot more autonomy, I think, as to
Yeah,
what was allowed to be presented in their classrooms and things like this. And they're the ones who know what's current in the market. They're the ones who know what the kids enjoy reading because they're in the classrooms every day where they're
right.
seeing what the kids choose to pick up for themselves, not what's thrust upon them. And so, unfortunately, like a lot of school programs have even shrunk. There are some schools where the librarian has been eliminated. Now we might have a library, but no official
Right.
librarian
Yeah.
to cultivate it. And even within the classrooms themselves, a lot of those teachers are being told, like, our school is going to read this book during this month, and then this book during this month.
Yeah.
And there's just a lot, there's a lot less help, I think, for parents to know. Whereas in the past, a teacher might have been able to say, here are the top 20 books that our classroom
Yeah.
is currently enjoying. And there are some teachers, who still do that work, and it's important work, but I think it's becoming a lot harder for
Yeah.
them to do that.
I do. Yeah. I think it comes from we're both in America. It comes from both political aisles. So
Yeah, oh, 100% it
like
does.
I think they get to the point where they're like, we got pressure on this side and we got pressure on this side. So this is the narrow chunk that you're allowed to choose
Yep,
from. And it tends to be the overly vetted books, that
yep.
um yeah, that don't really give kids that ability to see lots of different things. Like I don't yeah, it's hard. I know a couple of teachers who say they can't even accept donated books. Like you used to donate your books
Yeah,
to the teacher and have them be there and just watch your kid pick them up. That's rough.
yep,
So now
yep.
we have um and politics hit the kidlit market a lot, right? Because if
Probably
you
the worst of all of
really,
them. Yeah,
really, why do you think
yeah.
that?
Well, because you can have books that people might be opposed to, but one thing that's different with Kidlit than in the adult market or even the YA market,
Mhm.
in the YA market, teens can still make purchases on their
Mhm.
own.
Yeah,
They
that's true.
they do have a little bit more say, perhaps, on
Yeah,
how they're
yeah,
spending their money. They can visit a bookstore by themselves. But for kids who are under 12, they're kind of at the mercy of what's provided by their school, what's provided by their parents.
yeah,
And, I personally don't have any issue with parents overseeing what their children are reading. I think parents should raise their kids the way they think their kids should be raised. But it becomes more challenging if like a 7-year-old is like, I really want this book. And mom is like, I'm not buying you that drivel. It's just, it's a cartoon book and it doesn't,
yeah.
it kind of makes the kid feel bad for wanting what they
They
wanted. Whereas
want.
an adult can go to the bookstore. Like, I kind of want to turn back at adults sometimes and be like, so you're reading like all these Russian classics every night before bed, or,
Yeah,
you know,
I
like nobody.
know. I know we are kind of hard on our kids. Yeah, your worldview as a parent comes in. The pressure from society of wherever you work or live comes in on, and you can't help it. Like it does shape what you think your kid should read. And weirdly enough, we're so overtly political in America that a lot of times what you found out your school district's no longer allowing, a lot of parents will then be, well, then you have to read this one. It's just all very weird, right? Which
Yeah.
then tends to tell the publishers what the trend is, except
Yes.
that, of course, there's always trends that are left out. And then
Yes.
the publishing industry itself tends to be in New York City, which has its own worldview. And here we go. Like, we're all kind
Yeah,
of stuck.
it's also very wonky and weirdly connected.
Yeah,
It's
yeah. So then what about self-publishing or hybrid publishing? How do you see
uh
that in Kidlit?
honestly, for like 99% of people, I recommend that they don't do it. I
Really?
hate to say that. Maybe trends will change. Um, but for right now, for the same reasons that I've just mentioned, it is incredibly difficult to sell a kidlit book just in general because your buyer is not your ideal reader,
Mm, that's
right?
true. It's their
I
kid.
need the adult or the teacher or the librarian to buy it so that the 8-year-old will read it. And so there's often a disconnect there. And I think that only becomes exponentially greater when you have to self-publish, because now I'm having to market. I certainly, please, people, do not market to children online, right? I
Yeah.
mean, we need to market to the adults, and it just becomes very difficult, because why should I trust you, some random author who I've never heard of,
Right.
and I don't know anything that you're about, and now I don't even have like recommendations from other sources. I don't find your books in a bookstore, which is where maybe
Mm,
I am more inclined to buy them for a kid. If
right.
I'm
Right.
if I'm buying books for kids, I do think people still like to see kind of like to see the illustrations,
Mm,
or thumb through the book a little bit more than they might if they were purchasing a novel for themselves online. So
right.
I think, and then for the other reasons that are a little bit more pragmatic perhaps, but simply the cost, especially for
Mm,
producing a picture book, is astronomical compared to the cost of producing a novel, because now I have to have illustrations and full color and thick paper and a specific kind of binding, because you don't want the book to fall apart after 5 reads with a ambitious toddler. So, so it just becomes it's cost prohibitive for
mm.
most people to do it well.
That's interesting. So are you seeing any sort of new trends in kid lit on on them getting their stories out these days, or do you see like maybe a fork in the road coming, or is it just sort of going to be like this? And I mean, the publishing industry, a lot of what you're saying is the same, honestly,
Yes.
for some, except for maybe the cost prohibition, but because a novel is cheaper. But a lot of that is the same, right? Like it's still influenced, like adult literature is still influenced by a lot of this stuff. But because I know like Kickstarter, a lot of
Yep.
fantasy is happening over there, and a couple people are like writing their novels on Substack. So I know that's not a kid place, but are you seeing a different, maybe a creative place where people are trying to get their kid stories out there?
Yeah, so I think there can be a way for people to do it if they don't want to go the traditional or even the hybrid route. Again, hybrid you can do, but it still will be even more expensive because of
Right.
the illustration factor. But I think the people that succeed, because there are some people who do succeed in self-publishing their children's books, and I kind of feel like self-publishing YA is kind of more like self-publishing adult. So
Yeah.
that's kind of
Yeah.
where those are more similar. But if you're looking at middle grade and picture books, it's to your advantage to do, I think, in-person events
Okay.
where there are families present.
Hmm.
So things like homeschooling conventions, or
Oh, interesting.
people who are maybe like, I'm going to make something up here for a minute, but like campers
Hmm.
who like have a community, and like maybe somebody's going to self-publish something very specific about that experience, or sports parents, or where there's
Right.
kind of a little bit of an attachment to an already established community that you can sort of plug into to try and get your book out. What I don't think would be very successful is to just self-publish the book and like go to your bookstore and be like, hey, you want to stock my book?
Yeah.
Like this is not going to cut it, and I don't think you'll get the ads and things like that on. You
Yeah.
simply cannot afford to compete on
Yes.
Amazon. I mean, you'll spend tens of thousands of dollars to make 5.
Yes. Yes.
So it's not efficient for a lot of people to do that. But I do think if they can plug into an established community and form relationships with people in that way, and ultimately, just like with any book, you got to put forth a good product, because you're going to get one chance. And if
This
you
is true.
can, yeah, if you can establish like your own readership community,
Right.
then then you have a better chance of going the long haul. But you mentioned the Kickstarter. I do know of one very successful campaign, was done by Sarah Mackenzie of the Read Aloud Revival. She has hundreds of thousands of followers on Instagram and her own very large and well-established
Well, that already
community.
helps, doesn't it?
Yeah, she is
Is she the
probably
homeschooling
she
lady?
is like the
Okay, so
yeah, she's a big homeschooling authority and she speaks at a lot of national level conferences. So
okay, so it's
she
hard to compare.
it's totally hard to compare because she did it right.
Yeah,
She hired professional editors that had worked at big five companies. She hired art directors and text editors and professional illustrators. Like she basically did what a big five publisher would do, just that she did it herself. And she put that kind of money behind it, but she
yeah,
also brought back that kind of money because of the community that she had built. So most people cannot do this. And so
yes.
if you can do that, I say by all means go forth, and that is amazing for you to be able to do that, but it's not realistic for most people.
No, because that's basically treating one book as the foundation of a small business.
Yes,
And
yeah.
yeah,
And she ended up forming her own publishing company now
right, right.
to produce books that
Which
way.
maybe
So
maybe she will then be helpful. But again, she spent years building a platform, right? So
yes.
there is like we can't. I always try to keep writers from thinking like an overnight success, right? There
Oh,
really
heavens
aren't
no.
any.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe I think Brandon Sanderson brought some spotlight to Kickstarter and it's no longer a weird place, for the average person. So maybe there will be some shifts in Kidlit as well. But you brought up a good point a couple minutes ago of how like people think that it's easy to write Kidlit. Oh, I just have a story about how I walked home one day and encountered a dog and brought him home. I don't know. There's always a dog, right? Or like the purple crayon, or I don't know. Um, what, but you said it's not that easy. So what is it? What are the misconceptions that people have and or things that you find missing when you're talking to people who are trying to write a kid story, a children's story?
Yeah. So one of the most common issues that coaches, coaches, editors, agents, people coming across Kidlit stuff, um, people always think that because something that happened in their life resonated with them when they were a child, they automatically assume that it will resonate on a more global
Oh,
level. So that's one thing.
that hurts.
Um, yeah, yeah. I know I should preface, like, I'm going to say some perhaps
Is
not
that
kind
trigger
things,
warnings? Yeah.
but
But
another
it's
one,
true. It's
yes.
very true. It's you do have to think more on the very global scale, right? Or the national at least.
Yeah,
Uh,
or like, something that's a more universal experience. That's not to say that it can't be very specific,
mm-hmm.
but the heart of it needs
Mm-hmm.
to be more universal in some way. Um, Another problem is sometimes people think they've written something clever, they've shared it with their 5-year-old laughed, and now I must have written the funniest picture book in the world, failing to consider my 5-year-old will probably laugh at a lot of things I say, whether or not anybody else will is
They are
the
my biggest fan.
right. So that's another one that's very common. I think because children's books are shorter, people
Mhm.
automatically assume that I had to write less, therefore it was easier. But if anyone has ever had to write a synopsis, they will
Yeah, that is an
understand.
evil word for most writers. I hate the synopsis. This is true though. Um, so I would assume you get a lot as a short story editor. I get a lot of stories short. They are short
Mhm.
usually. There's no meaning. There's no point.
Yeah.
Is that another problem?
Yep. Yep,
There's
for
just
sure.
like,
And I think so. Another thing is like people just don't have any understanding of the current market, and the current
mm,
market is so different than it was 20 years ago, not to mention 50 years ago. So
right.
if someone is writing a picture book that's along the lines of something they read in 1970, um, it doesn't fly today. Like it doesn't work. And people have a misunderstanding of the picture book format in particular.
Okay.
Um, people don't realize that really the illustrations should be telling half the story. So if I can tell you the whole story and you don't need to see any illustrations, if the illustrations aren't adding anything to your reading experience, then what I have written is a short story.
Aha, that's interesting. I had not thought of that. Now that I'm quickly trying to think of all the picture books I've read
Yeah,
in my life. You're right though.
yeah.
That's interesting. And you know what? You don't realize that just being the parent reading them.
No, because it's so seamless and we've become so used to it. But a huge factor in producing a quality picture book is the page turn.
Yeah.
The page turn is like the thing in a picture book. And so you have to have a good understanding of how it's going to look on the spreads, even if you're not the illustrator, how it's going to move. You work on your pacing by like, you've seen those books where it's like over one spread, it's maybe one big word or something. And then on
Right.
another spread, it's like maybe a few paragraphs. And the pacing with how we progress through the book is a big deal. And so people just I think are clueless about, and I don't mean that to sound derogatory towards
Oh,
people,
we're all
but
clueless. Yes.
I just think that if it is something that people are interested in doing, like honestly, you shouldn't write a picture book until you've read at least 100 of them.
And analyze them, it looks like, it
Yes.
sounds like. I mean, this does come down to it is an art form. No matter what you're writing, it is an art form. And just because you have appreciated the art form all of your life does not mean that you know how
Yeah.
to create the art. I can go to, the Museum of Art and appreciate it. I cannot pick up a brush to save my life. I cannot. I would, if it was me or death, I would die. There would be no painting. But because like I have consumed a million picture books, like that's not even hyperbole. It probably is. So because I have three kids, we read all the time, as
Yeah.
a reader, as a writer, but I had never I remember now there's so many books, and it's probably on purpose, where you have to pause. You're looking at the time because it's bedtime and you want the kid to go to bed, but now you're paused on this one page because we're looking for all the things, like that are hidden in there, and it's just part of the fun of the book. Um, but I wouldn't have thought of that even as a novelist. Of like, okay, I have to think of what illustration is going here now
Yeah.
and not overtell the child what because the kid really doesn't care. They're just like they know the story by heart, right? Like they can repeat it back to you. They want to see the pictures and they want, gosh.
Yeah.
It does sound like more an art form that needs to be studied. So is this something that you cover when you're doing your Kidlit Summit?
I do to some extent. I invite picture book people on to come and talk about it. I mean, everybody is always learning. The market's always
Always
changing.
changing.
I mean, nowadays, picture books are getting shorter and shorter and shorter. I mean,
Really?
oh gosh, yes. Now it's like don't even send something out if it's longer than 500 words.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. Half of my favorite picture books would be gone.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
So, and
interesting.
I mean, the other one that's really rough is rhyming. People automatically assume that if it's a picture book, it must rhyme, and you'll find most everywhere that everybody's telling you, do not send me anything that rhymes. And a big reason for this is because so many people do it so badly.
So
So,
bad. That's another art form that you should probably learn
yeah.
before you just rhyme. Yeah, I mean, Dr. Seuss was one man. We don't always have to follow everyone.
Right.
Um, yeah, and you're going to end up finding weird words to rhyme with the words you want. Oh my gosh, that's funny. Um, so when you go in, so if somebody has an idea for what they would consider a kid lit, is it easier to break into the middle school market or YA market than the children's book?
Well, one would think.
Oh no. You're just a ray of sunshine.
I know. I'm like the cynical person. Right now, I mean, there's trends all the time.
There
Right
are.
now, it would appear that middle grade might be going through a little bit of a rough patch, trying
Really?
to find its footing, I think.
I blame the
Um,
45-year-old writers because they're
yeah,
messing up YA for us too.
I think there's a little bit of uncertainty around there. That's not to say that people shouldn't write those markets. One thing that I will say though is for the reasons that we talked about earlier with an agent working with a picture book author as opposed to a middle grade author, they are more likely to take on people with a novel simply because now they get, the full commission on that work as
Mm,
opposed to with the picture books. And it is a little bit easier, I think, probably to sell a novel, but at the same time, that middle grade space is still a weird space. So many parents just feel uncertain about what books they should get and things like that. So it's a hard market to sell. And right now, a lot of libraries and schools, which I think is also a little bit of a trickle down from COVID, um, spending in certain areas is
mm,
maybe not what it had been. And so I think that there's still a little bit of turbulence that just
mm,
hasn't quite found its sure footing. Um, but again, it's like there, so one beef that I have with the middle grade market, and I'm very happy to hear that the trend is reversing because for a while I felt that middle grade was just getting so bloated with the book length. It was like
mm.
if you looked at something like the Beverly Cleary books, they
Yep.
which would be considered on the younger end of middle grade, but still they were ranging in the 25 to 30,000 word range. And middle grade that was coming out more recently was like 50 to 60,000. And as I was reading it myself, I was like, a lot of this doesn't even need to be here. It's slowing the reading down. Like it's just ugh. And now because of rising paper costs,
That's so funny. That would be, of
it,
course,
it's
it's
like
money.
flipped.
Yeah.
So people now are wanting things that are a bit trimmer again. And that makes me happy because I think that's also a better reading experience for
Yes.
kids. Things that are tighter. Graphic novels are super big. They've grown a lot. I happen to love graphic novels, but there are adults that feel conflicted about whether they are actually
If
reading
they're
or
real
not.
reading, my husband and I have this conversation all the time. I'd rather my kids hold a book. As a mom, though, what I like about graphic novel is that it's easy to flip through and see if it aligns with what I want my 11-year-old to
Mm,
know about the world at this moment.
yes.
And that could be different for a lot of people. Like I will I will let my kids read some things that other people might not let their kids read, but a graphic novel at least I can see what the worldview of the author is through the pictures much quicker than when I go to the store with my 16-year-old and I have to like look up what is in this book. Like I need movie ratings on books at this point. Um, and I think that's important for every parent, whether you're very liberal or very conservative in your book handing out, with your children. Um, but it is true. I went to go find a new a new series for my 11-year-old, who's my most avid reader, and she had really loved. I wish I could remember. I can see it's the really fat ones that series that came out like, and even she was like, I don't know why they have to be in the forest again. Like walking through the forest. That might be a little rub off on me complaining about things sometimes. Um, but honestly, it ended up being like all the Campton Underpants, all the things that she's already read and they're in the schools. And then it was Percy Jackson, which she's already seen the movie, so it's kind of like meh. And then yeah, not a whole lot more. There was not like a lot of um choice in the
Yeah.
middle school section, and I was like, I don't think you're right. So then I had to like dig in my head, and that was a lot of energy to like figure out what might you say.
Right. Well, I think the other issue that I've had in recent years with middle grade is it has felt very maybe pedantic. It feels like a lot of books are being written with the purpose of preaching some kind of message
Yep.
to kids. And I'm sorry, kids really hate to be told what to think.
I
And
don't.
why can't they just read a good and entertaining story? Why does everything, I want to be careful here because I also know that there were gaps in the market. And so some of the heavier topics, kids who are um, enduring abusive situations or have some kind of substance abuse in their family or
Mhm.
very weighty topics. There weren't really books to address those issues, and I do think those books are important because they provide a space, like a safe space for kids to kind of encounter that and then maybe have discussions with someone
Right.
based on what they've read. But because those books were starting to be produced, all of a sudden it felt like the majority of books were
Mhm.
falling into this really just weighty, weighty, weighty kind of material. And for a long time, middle grade started feeling very dark to me. And
Yes, and too
I,
old.
yeah, and to the point where I was like, I used to enjoy reading it, but now I feel like I'm being hit over the head with some kind of lesson on life that I just don't want to be in this this reading
Yes.
experience.
Yes, I
So,
do. I think there are some books, as my parents were both nurse practitioners in certain fields, and my mother was in a field where there were books that I felt were almost published specifically to address situations that certain
mhm.
kids were going through, which is great. On the other hand, if your kid is not going through that situation and they're 10 years old and exposing them to the fact that some kids live in a really terrible circumstances is might just turn their world completely upside down and they won't know how to handle it because it really depends on the emotional development of your own child, right? So for them to just be exposed to and have all these questions about things that they're not ready for and you were just like, I just wanted to buy you a book, I thought it was
Yeah,
cute, and the covers were not always exposing the theme of the book either. And so like I think middle school is difficult because it depends where the kid, the situation of the kid's life, honestly where they're like, what is that called, the where they're born. I can't think of the word, like the birth order.
oh sure.
Like, whatever. um and then just the individual child, right? Like what their mental development, their emotional development, all that. And yeah, there were certain books that I got with my child that I was like, and we're done. Like, we're going to be taking this way. And then there were other books because I know her that I will introduce her to because I know she can handle it and we're going to have an interesting conversation about it, right? So that is it is a tricky age. I think it's a really
It's a
tricky
very
age.
tricky age, and I think that it's good for the young readers to potentially get some exposure to different cultures and
Yep.
different lifestyles and things like this. But when everything feels like, I mean, again, I'll refer to the adults. How many of us are continually picking up novels for the purpose of being taught something?
Yeah.
I just don't think that we approach books that way.
Yeah.
And yet, a lot of what's being put forth for kids does feel like, hey, we want you to learn this lesson about such and such a thing. And it's getting harder to find the books of adventure and the books of
Right.
wonder
Right.
and, um, yeah, moral
Yeah.
courage and things like this. So,
Yes, yes, exactly. So I think as we talk about as coaches, every time the mood that you are in as a writer is going to come off in your book. And so if you feel very preachy, like I want these kids to know this certain thing that I am passionate about, it's going to come off and yeah, I was never into those books as a child and sometimes I'm not as an adult. So
yeah,
yeah, remember your audience, right? Remember like go, it's weird though, because this is going to sound creepy to be like, go be around your audience when they're 10 to 12 year olds. Like you can't, but you might then speak to middle school teachers or speak to people who, if you are not, if you don't have any nieces, nephews, or kids that age. But it is more difficult, isn't it, to study your
yeah.
ideal reader?
It is, it is. And I think it's probably worth saying that the creators that are, I think, both doing the best work and their sales will demonstrate that as well. they are the ones that are writing with the children in mind. They are writing for their child audience, not for the grown-ups who want to buy the books for
Not to impress the grown-ups. Yes.
for the children. And so, there are some, I don't mean to make it sound like there are excellent creators for sure. But as a market, it does feel like it's floundering a little bit, and I hope that it will even out here in the next few
I do
years.
too, because that age group deserves books for them. I mean,
Yes.
if you remember like what you liked at that age, I mean, I was obsessed with the Babysitters Club at age 10. I couldn't wait to be 13. I thought that was so old. And now I look at my 13-year-old and I'm like, sit down, you're young.
Yeah.
You're little. Just sort of thinking about what you wanted. Of course, there were morals in almost every book, but it didn't feel like I was being bludgeoned over the head with them, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, just remembering. So with middle school and into YA, it is a little bit easier though to self-publish, or is it about the same?
I would say for middle grade, it's still very difficult because
Okay.
it's still difficult to connect with readers
Yeah.
if you're not in schools and libraries
Yes,
and
please don't
bookstores.
DM young children on social
Oh
media.
gosh, no, please do not. So that is difficult just from
Mm,
a sales perspective. From a cost perspective, you're producing a novel and it's fewer pages,
right, right, right.
than a YA novel. So that cost of that might not be as prohibitive as it would with a picture book, but it's just really difficult to get that book past the gatekeepers. So we call the gatekeepers librarians, teachers, parents,
Right.
people
You
who,
kind of have to talk to them, but right to the child. I can see how
yes.
just marketing for most of us, that's going to be a bit of a mind-boggling adventure.
Yeah, yeah. So
Probably
it's
in-person
trickier.
sales is just as, if you're going to go that route, that's also
Yeah,
the
again,
best
like
way.
the conventions, family activities that are tied with whatever your book may be about, or the community that
Hmm.
might be a community that you can tap into in an authentic way. Um,
Yes. You put on your marketing. I know it's tough. It is tough. And on this podcast, I like to make sure people understand what we're going into. We write because we have to write, right? But then
right?
comes the sale.
Yeah.
It's not as easy. Um, you're in the homeschooling world, but it seems like you're very connected with the schools as well.
Mhm.
Do you have authors coming into libraries? Like, is that a thing or has that kind of
Yeah,
changed since COVID?
yeah, we do have that happening. I think that just varies though from school to
Mm.
school as to, I mean, so this is actually a big part of being a kidlit author that's pretty significant. If that's how a lot of authors make their income, is to do
Oh,
school visits. Like it is a significant portion of their income
wow.
if they're a full-time author,
But that's also a lot
because
of time.
that's a ton of time. And I mean, but it's not cheap to do a school visit, but usually you'll get, like the PTO or something will hire somebody and bring them in. But yeah, that's why you will see a lot of kidlit writers. I mean, they really do work very
Very
hard.
hard.
Yeah, they're doing school visits sometimes for different ages, even like you might visit an elementary school and you're like, with the kindergarten and first graders, I'll do this workshop for an hour in the morning. And then with the second and third graders, we'll do this one around lunchtime. And then older elementary will do a workshop at the end of the day. And you get all sorts of levels of that.
Sure. But just
But
being
yeah,
prepared for that sort of mental and physical energy
yeah.
that you're gonna need.
While writing your next book.
Well, right. Yay. I hope we haven't been a total downer. But this is how it is. I want people to really understand, like, how much do you want to make this a full business? How much do you just want to write the book and maybe have it for your grandkids? Like, these are important questions that you should be answering um,
Yes.
as a writer, because it's ever changing.
Yes, and I suppose there's maybe two other things to say about this,
Yes.
two more discouragements for people. I can just be the total downer today, but as slow as publishing is, it's even slower in the children's book market, especially if illustrations are involved.
Wow.
So whereas some people might expect like 12 to 18 month lead time, it is not uncommon to be waiting 3 years for your picture book to be bought and
Wow.
published. I mean, I've known people who have waited like a decade for their first book.
No.
Yes, like their what was supposed to be their debut ended up being more like their fourth book by the time it came out, compared to some of the others, like when they may have sold or not sold and things like that. So it
Wow.
is notoriously slow, especially with the illustrations, because oftentimes the publisher will need to line up the illustrator's schedule with their production schedule. And if the illustrator that they really want is already, 6 months booked out, you're waiting. You're
You're
just
waiting.
waiting, waiting and
Yep.
waiting and waiting. It's also worth noting, like, you really have to let go of creative control, because
Mm-hmm.
authors and illustrators, they don't work together like
Mm-hmm.
most of the time, unless they are already people with really well-established reputations. People often don't even speak to their illustrator. They've never seen the illustrations until they open the box of books that
Books.
arrives on their
That is very
doorstep.
important for people to understand. This is just like you have no creative control over your cover. You will have no creative control over your illustrator unless you are the illustrator. So,
Right, right. And then um, maybe one more piece of information too. Like, in all of publishing, there's always going to be books that are coming out by famous people.
mm-hmm.
Everybody's got to deal with that to some extent. But there are far fewer famous people who are writing the latest thriller novel,
Yep.
as opposed to some celebrity who now says, I have an I love you book. And I mean, they're coming out every season, right? It's like,
Yes.
here's the celebrity spring I love you book, and here's the summer I love you book, and here's the
Yep.
winter I love you book. And unfortunately, these are the things that keep the market afloat.
Right.
um, they are the things that get the most attention on the Today Show and
Yep. Yep.
in all the national media, but they are generally speaking not the books that I would be buying for my own kids. So
Yes. And yet lots of people will buy them. And the good chain reaction is if they're in the bookstore, they might pick up your book. The bad thing is most people buy it through Amazon. So like the industry is very complicated now. So um yeah, it is really important to understand all of these factors before you spend a lot of time. And unfortunately, like this woman I met, she said, I don't think I'll pick it up again. She's going to go and instead sort of change the story into a YA book, um, which might, as you listen to this, might be something that you would consider.
yeah,
Like it is kind of what it is. We I hate to put it out there, but we got to be real because as coaches, especially, the last thing we want is to promise the world and
yeah.
the world not to come for sure.
Yeah. I think it's a great endeavor for people to do if they're really passionate about doing it. Go ahead and write them, learn how to illustrate if you want,
Hmm.
and do those kinds of things. But if you're really interested in making the leap to go to the next level and to publish, like, it is going to be possibly the most difficult publishing route that you can go. I think maybe poetry might be right up there with it, but I it's the numbers are really just not in your favor. And I think people need to be, have their eyes wide open
Yes,
when they're
absolutely.
deciding whether to
Absolutely.
go forth or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And yet there are books published every year. And so, yeah, if you are passionate, if you have a good book, just keep going, right?
Yeah,
Like and that goes with the adult books as well, quite
yeah.
honestly. Sometimes it takes a decade to get a book published, but um where can people find you? Because I know you have a Kidlit Summit. You have that twice a year?
I do that in the
Once
summer.
a
I
year.
do
Once a year.
Kidlit summer camp in June, which is fun. It's like a free event with I get interviews with people from all over the Kidlit world. And I should also point out, Kidlit people are very generous. So even
Yes,
though
they
it's
are.
very difficult to break in, they're also a very supportive community. So I would encourage people to find other
Right.
Kidlit people who really just understand what's involved and Places like the SCBWI are a great resource for people who are trying to learn more about this market. But I am at solutionsforwriters.com, where people can find out information about Kidlit Summer Camp if they want, or any of my other, I
Yes,
have a
because
lot of
you're
free
also, we didn't
resources.
get to the other ones. You have a lot of free resources. You do a novel kickoff as well. It's a summit in the fall. Are you still going to do it in the fall? Well,
Yeah,
you have to
yep,
follow. Okay. I was like, follow Sarah. I'll have the links in the show notes because you also do nonfiction, which I'm going
yeah.
to have you back for because I'm about to get certified, and then memoir and fiction. You do all the things.
I know I'm a
So,
compulsive learner. I can't be stopped.
so we'll definitely have you back to talk about more things like that. The other genres. I don't know why I'm lost for words at this point. But I encourage all of you guys to click the links below and find Sarah and follow her and her newsletter and get all her resources. Thank you so much, Sarah, for coming on and talking to us about Kidlit today.
Well, thank you so much, Kat. You asked excellent questions. It was fun to like really dig into what might appear to be some not pleasant topics to talk about, but I think important. And I
Yeah,
hope that people will feel encouraged to keep going if it's something they feel passionate about doing.
absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you.